Thank you, Dr. Hark. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Huddersfield for securing this very important debate and putting Sudan in the spotlight as it must, because this war is the greatest humanitarian catastrophe since the advent of modern aid, with 25 million people in acute hunger, famine abounding, a war on civilians and women and girls, and it has displaced 13 million people, and it affects us directly in Britain too. Around 10% of those arriving on small boats are Sudanese. I would like to focus on three questions. Is our response to Sudan's humanitarian need enough? Are our diplomatic efforts enough? And is our work to support the establishment of a democratic civilian government enough? Across a world of proliferating conflict, we are observing a growing disregard for international humanitarian law, with warring parties increasingly seeing access to humanitarian aid as a weapon to be wielded. The UK has attributed famine conditions in parts of Sudan to systemic aid obstruction by both the RSF and the SAF. We must continue to push for aid to get in and for warring parties to respect international humanitarian law. But we must also recognise that under these conditions, local groups are often best placed and better equipped than INGOs to meet civilian needs. Sudan's emergency response rooms have become the international symbol of such groups. They are community kitchens, shelters and medical centres. They provide clean water, they treat and protect victims of sexual violence. And currently they are reaching more than 4 million people. In response to a recent written question from me on the ERRs, the government directed me to the £120 million spend announced by the Foreign Secretary at the London conference and said that a portion of this uplift will go to local responders through the Sudan Humanitarian Fund. But so far this year, the Sudan Humanitarian Fund is just 23% funded. The total shortfall is over $3 billion, and a cliff edge looms due to USAID and other international donor cuts. Our current contribution, though welcome, does not touch the sides of what is required. I understand that the government is still assessing how best to support EIRs and local actors, but can I ask the Minister, since USAID have done the hard work of due diligence and bureaucracy, can we not step up now and do more? This government has slashed Britain's international development budget to its lowest level this century, which I will again urge the government to reverse. But ministers claim that Sudan will remain a priority, but it is unclear whether they will have the resources necessary to make real impact. At the same time, the government's cuts requires us now to rethink and reform. Localisation has risks, but we must acknowledge that when it comes to Sudan, the old ways may not work. So, the emergency response rooms may be an example of how to do it. In view of this, can the Minister please provide an update? How much of the £120 million pledged at the London conference has been allocated and through which channels? And does that include support for displaced Sudanese in the region, particularly in Chad and South Sudan? Turning to diplomacy, before the International Development Committee, the Foreign Secretary told me that since the London conference, he has had separate conversations on Sudan with the UAE, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. He did not, however, elaborate, so perhaps the Minister can. Have these conversations produced any tangible progress? And if not, should the Prime Minister not become involved to drive action at a higher level? The war in Sudan is being worsened by outside state actors offering diplomatic, financial and sometimes military support to the warring parties. I am pleased that Britain has consistently expressed opposition to this behaviour, but words are not enough. It has been consistently reported and alleged, most prominently by the New York Times, that the UAE has been funneling weapons to the RSF. The UN's panel of experts on Sudan told the Security Council that these allegations are credible. The UAE is a significant buyer of British military exports, so their purported actions raise serious concerns in relation to the strategic export licensing criteria, not only a material consideration in relation to the risk of diversion, but also violating the spirit of other criteria. The FCDO is vital to decisions made by the Export Control Joint Unit, so can I ask the Minister what assessment she has made of the reports that the UAE is supplying weapons to the RSF? It is a question that I have asked the Minister present, the Foreign Secretary, and have since received an inadequate response from the Minister for Africa. So I would be grateful if the Minister could respond on what view the government takes of the compatibility of such actions with the strategic export licensing criteria. It is not only arms that are fueling this war, it is also gold. In response to a written question in June, the government told me that since the war began, Britain has frozen assets of 9 commercial entities linked to the SAF and RSF. With the exceptions of November's sanctions on 2 RSF commanders, all these measures were imposed under the last government. It's been more than a year since this government took office, a year in which famine conditions were confirmed, a year in which almost nothing has been done to address Sudan's war through further sanctions. Why is this? 3 Russian entities linked to Sudan's illicit gold trade are also sanctioned. This is good, but Russia is not the only implicated nation. They are not even the most significant. By far the most important player in the global trade of Sudanese conflict gold is the UAE. So why have no steps been taken to impose consequences on the UAE for their role in this trade? To make a dent on the global trade in Sudanese blood gold, Britain will have to use sanctions strategically with a view to dismantling entire systems, as opposed to merely punishing 1 or 2 offenders. We will have to work closely with willing partners, particularly the EU, Canada, the Nordics and the United States. Can the Minister assure me that these conversations are ongoing? Simultaneously, we must drive high-level initiatives to bring key commanders and external actors to the table. There are reports of a new peace framework taking shape in Washington, one built not upon inclusion and democracy, but it seems on power sharing, resource control, and the legitimisation of the SAF and RSF. A deal must not be made outside states over the heads of the Sudanese people. And so I am glad to see the Foreign Secretary's commitment to a Sudanese-led transition to civilian government and in extending the UN fact-finding mission to Sudan, investigating human rights abuses and crimes. However, this government can and should be doing more to support Sudanese civil society and democratic groups, both in Sudan and in exile. I'm aware that the government, through Global Partners for Governance, helps to fund the anti-war pro-democracy coalition. How is the government ensuring that these groups in exile remain representative and accountable to the Sudanese people? Can the Minister outline the recent work of the UK Special Envoy to Sudan? How is he engaging with pro-democracy organisations and diaspora groups, particularly those in exile throughout the region? We must work with as many like-minded partners as possible, with willing allies like Canada, the Nordic states and others. So can the Minister share how Britain is building diplomatic support for an inclusive peace process which centres on the civilian democratic voices in Sudan for a sustainable peace? Thank you.
Minister.